Greetings, and thanks for joining me. As an emergency physician and frontline medical provider, I have personally witnessed the effects of gun violence on patients and their families. Gun violence has been present in every state I've practiced medicine in since being a student and now as an attending physician. Virginia, then New York City, and of course South Florida. In 2017, I was part of the trauma team that responded following the Fort Lauderdale airport mass shooting. I still remember being in the ED that day as several patients came in, a few with gunshot wounds to their arms and legs, one gentleman with a gunshot wound to his face. The amount of violence I witnessed that day was disturbing. It's an experience I cannot forget. In the news media, we hear reports of gun violence occurring daily in inner city neighborhoods. Collectively as a nation, we have been desensitized from gun violence as long as it happens to other people. The inner cities and our southern borders are stereotyped as violent. We think violence there is okay, even though, of course, it is not. From time to time, there's a report of a mass shooting, and it shocks the consciousness of our country given the insanity and severity of the reported crime. Most importantly, when gun violence affects those that it shouldn't, there's a huge public uproar that is mostly silent to gun violence as it relates to gangs, drugs, and even when the police kill unarmed civilians. Columbine, Newtown, the Pulse Club shooting, the Vegas mass shooting where 60 people were killed and over 900 injured, the Charleston, South Carolina church massacre, now Buffalo, Uvalde, and most recently, the hospital shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There are literally too many mass shootings for me to name. Obviously, all of these crimes are horrible, and it's nearly unimaginable to understand the pain and anguish families experience in the aftermath of these crimes. I'm an American. I was born in this country. My great-grandparents are born in this country, and my family descended from slavery on both sides. My grandfathers are both war veterans, one fighting in Korea, the other fighting in World War II. I love the United States and the service my family has given to this country since slavery, but I also understand that we have a complicated history. Like people, countries and their histories, stated values, and subsequent actions can be complicated and full of contradictions. The United States is like this. We love freedom and defend the rights and liberty of people domestically and abroad. We also allow people easy access to weapons of war, like an AR-15 rifle, and do very little to prevent the violent murder of our fellow citizens as we prioritize gun rights over the right to live and exist without the fear of dying from gun violence. This is not inflammatory speech on my part or an exaggeration. Just look around. Additionally, personally, just a few weeks ago, a psych patient came to my hospital with a gun and made threats against me and one of my fellow physicians. The initial time this person came to the hospital with a gun, security was unable to detain the patient and she left prior to the police being called. A few days later, the patient returned to the hospital, again with a gun. However, this time our security protocols were activated. We were able to detain and de-arm the patient. I should note that the vast majority of psych patients that I treat who are having mental health crises are not violent. However, the ease of gun ownership in my state and the increased incidence of violence reported against healthcare workers during the pandemic is truly unnerving. Unfortunately, no more than 1 week after these threats were made against me and another physician, the hospital shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma occurred. 4 people were killed, including 2 physicians, one being a black male orthopedic surgeon from Harvard. This act of violence particularly pisses me off because it was likely preventable had gun reform been addressed by our Congress in the almost 25 years since Columbine. Given the failures of our elected officials and the federal government to correct the ease in which those who wish to harm others can obtain guns and weapons of war, private companies must do more to keep their staff safe from violent crime. Now ask yourself the question, can we really depend on private companies to ensure the safety of Americans? Although the private sector and the pursuit of profit has led to economic growth and job creation in this country, no one's debating that, hospitals usually operate with very thin margins, and private corporations look for ways to decrease costs and protect profits. Unfortunately, hospital security is something that has seen chronic underinvestment in hospitals across the United States. All hospitals need metal detectors at their entrances. I will say that again. All hospitals need metal detectors at their entrances. We currently do not have any, and there's a cost associated with their installation and maintenance. Uniformed, armed police should be a part of hospital security. Some hospitals have this, many do not, we do not. The reason is the associated cost. Police departments are allowed to charge higher rates than usual to have a uniformed detail officer on duty in hospitals. This should not be the case. And due to the increased cost of having trained police on duty protecting patients and medical staff, many hospital corporations choose lower cost options that lack the training and effectiveness needed to confront a violent patient or an active shooter. During my career, I've seen staff be harassed by patients or by their family members, and at worst, assaulted given these managerial decisions. The amount of gun violence in this country is not leveling off or decreasing. Just look around. Given the world that we're living in and the ease of obtaining a gun in this country, more must be done to protect the citizens in areas where large numbers of people are known to congregate. If private industry cannot provide the security we need to stay safe, the federal government must provide funding to support school, hospital, shopping center, and all forms of public safety from gun violence. Now, the obvious solution would be to remove the guns. But for whatever reason, we continue to make a deity of the Second Amendment. Americans worship guns and their right to bear arms. This is written in the Constitution of the United States, and we're living the results of words that were written in the 18th century. Now, of course, all cultural norms from 250 years ago do not apply to today's society, nor should they. Yet we cannot come together and make common sense modifications to our laws that we all know should be made. It makes no sense. If we continue down this path, we will continue to experience death, violence, and injury far beyond what should be tolerated as a, quote, first world civilized nation. Now, the choice is up to the voting citizens of this country. When we demand change, change will happen. Currently, a bipartisan group of senators are crafting a gun reform bill. We will see if this proposal is meaningful or just another Band-Aid that will not actually decrease violence. When people refuse to send their children back to school until meaningful gun reform legislation is passed, you may see change. Lawmakers, you have all summer to get this done. All summer. When patients refuse to visit hospitals that do not have metal detectors and armed police on site, you may see change. Hospital administrators, we've seen way too much violence against healthcare workers. Please act now and petition local, state, and federal leaders for the needed funding to secure hospitals. Lastly, when we refuse to vote for politicians who would rather continue the status quo of our gun laws, leaving Americans vulnerable to continued gun violence and death, when we elect candidates that make gun reform a central part of their platform for elected office, when we collectively come together and say enough is enough, we cannot continue operating this way, when we do all of these things, positive change may occur, and the rate of gun violence and death may finally decrease. We have the power, my friends. We need to use it. Now, my thoughts are far from comprehensive regarding the gun debate in this country, but I wanted to speak my truth, given my experience with the patient threatening me and another physician with gun violence, and then, of course, in the aftermath of the hospital shooting. It's tragic. We all need to speak up. By acting now, we can correct years of indifference towards gun violence and stop the killings. This needs to be everyone's goal and everyone's cause. Let me know what you think. God bless you all, and God bless this country. Respectfully, Dr. Roddy.